Welcome to the Ranchonomics Podcast, where we empower you to build a better ranch and transform your operations into a thriving business. I'm your host, John Haskell. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the Ranchonomics Podcast. I am here today with Ben Habig. Ben, nice to have you here.
Good to be here.
Awesome. Ben is a goat and sheep grazer up in Montana, right?
Yeah.
And if you'd give us a little introduction, we are going to talk about grazing weeds today. So let's get on with it.
Yes, sir. So me and my wife, primarily me, but a lot of my wife as well, run a business we call Habig Livestock. And the primary centerpiece enterprise of the whole thing is prescribed grazing. We do own some sheep, but the primary deal are goats. And we've been utilizing them on kind of ranch landscapes to target invasive weeds, noxious weeds, and some other species at times. But it's all happening primarily in south central Montana.
Yeah. Back in the olden days when I was a prescriptive grazer, grazing weeds, I used to prefer that we talked about doing land management instead of grazing weeds, right? We're trying to take our pastures from something we don't want to something we do want, right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
I didn't know that about you, John. You hadn't divulged that.
Oh, yeah. We can talk about that later. I got paid to graze cheatgrass many years ago on Deer Winter Range. It was a fun deal. I learned a ton.
Yeah, I could learn something from you. So
back in the day when I was a Fred Provenza student. So it's good fun. Anyway, let's jump in. So you've kind of structured your business basically to help other people with their land. So let's talk about that specifically, how it works, kind of the details of what you do, and talk a little. So first thing I'd like to ask you about is, what kind of weeds are we talking about? What are weeds that are good forage for small ruminants like you work with?
Well, in our area, and the business that I've done so far has been primarily based on leafy spurge, houndstongue, plant called tall larkspur, and we've done a little bit of brush control, plant we call here, I think it's American licorice. But anyhow, the primary ones being leafy spurge and houndstongue, and a little bit of the tall larkspur.
And both, like leafy spurge especially, it is a noxious weed that is a terrible problem throughout the Intermountain West, right? And the
Correct.
mountain.
Yeah, it's quite prevalent.
Yeah, very good. And what does it do to pastures, just to give a quick intro?
So generally speaking, cattle do avoid it. It'll grow a lot of times in, patches that can range from anything the size of your coffee table to, the size of a few pickups or something, just depending on the way the land lays and the plants themselves. But generally those cattle will graze around those plants the vast majority of their growth cycle, and not just skip the leafy spurge, but skip the grass that might be growing in amongst that spurge. And spurge is unique, and I haven't figured it out yet, but I've seen spurge grow in standing water in a riparian zone, and it'll grow up on top of the rockiest, dirtiest, nastiest hill you've seen before as well. And about the only difference is the plant up on top's a little smaller and sparser than the one on the bottom, but it can grow, it appears to be about anywhere.
Yeah, very good. And that is something that is definitely not cow feed, but good feed for goats, right?
Right. I haven't done the testing myself, but I'm pretty sure that it can have a protein in the neighborhood of 20%.
Yeah, I have. And if you look at the nutritional profile of it with secondary compounds removed, basically, it is better than alfalfa. The problem is it has secondary compounds that make it toxic, right? So,
right.
Okay, very good. So let's jump in. How does your business work? What do you do?
Right now, it's important to understand maybe that this business for us, the prescribed grazing piece, we've been doing for 2 years now. This will be our third season in the summer of 26. Prior to that, we've run goats on a production level we've owned goats for almost going on 10 years now. So they're not brand new to us, but, we're not the master either. But the prescribed grazing piece has been 2 seasons. And those 2 seasons, basically what it's looked like for us is within roughly a 2-hour radius of our home base, we have contracted with private landowners. These are ranches that in our part of the world, the ranches we've been running on are, we'll call them anywhere from 2 to 10,000 acre sort of spots. And we get on the ranch and we find these specific areas where these weeds are prevalent and in high concentrations, and the landowners and or managers, say, this is the area that I want you to focus on. The remainder of the ranch, is fine. We don't need goats there. And so we bring those goats in and target those areas. Generally, we're working with temporary electric fence, so poly wire, and roughly speaking, we work on daily moves and get these goats moved across those weedy patches. And generally speaking, because the goat is selective, these weeds are, I call it first tier feeds. So, when they enter a paddock, they go to it. And so we do our best to manage our time and get those goats out of there before they drop down to their second tier feeds or whatever it might be.
Great. And yeah, and that takes a lot of attention, doesn't it? Because we've all seen cases of, just like cows, we've all seen cases of bad goat grazing, right, where they eat everything right down to the nubs. I have some neighbors down the road that keep a dozen goats in their horse pasture, and if the horses weren't bad enough, the goats get the rest of it, right?
Right.
Good. Okay, so this is an interesting place where you are working with other people that are ranching, that are making their living off their, vegetative production. How do you think about how you plug in with that? What kind of opportunity is that for you, and what kind of opportunity is that for the landowner?
Yeah, and the full disclosure of it is some of these landowners, these can be some of them absentees. Some of them do live on the place, but in our part of the world, and full disclosure, we have a lot of people that I would say are not making their living from ranching. They have an enterprise and they care about the profitability of this enterprise, but that may or may not be a distinction that's important. But to kind of go down the path of your question, a lot of these people are to the point where it's about they don't want to use chemical anymore. Right, wrong, indifferent, this is where they're living at, and they've seen enough of, we're going to pay this chemical application and we're going to do it, and then the next year we're right back here again.
Yep. And you've seen that same thing, right? I mean, I know I've done it with leafy spurge, right, where you spray it and it's back.
Yeah, so no matter what, they see it as, we're spending money on this problem every year if we're going to address it, because the chemical, it's not a one and done, that's for sure. And sometimes it's not even a spray it once and come back in 3 to 5 years. Sometimes it's come back every year or every other. And so it turns into this annual cost. And so they're looking at it and saying, well, I've got an annual cost no matter what it appears. And I'm putting this chemical on the ground, which, you know, it's hard to maybe quantify, but we all know it's not healthy. To what degree is debatable, but it's not healthy. Additionally, a lot of these people, they have properties that are down that involve a riparian area that's highly valued for various reasons. A lot of it's recreation. And if it's bad enough to spray chemical up on a dry old rocky hill, it's even worse to spray it next to the water. And so these folks have come to the conclusion that, we're looking for a different path to go down to control this. And another piece that's really big for them, or that is part of the value proposition maybe, is, when we spray that chemical, we don't put any fertility into the ground. But when we run a goat across it and we convert that vegetation into manure and urine, we're actually getting a fertilizer pass as well, which, you know, instead of detracting from the soil health by putting chemical, now we're actually adding to the soil health. So that's a big swing there.
Yep. And I think, help me if I'm incorrect, my recollection was that 2,4-D and Tordon are kind of what you use for leafy spurge.
I believe that's what gets used
Yep.
the majority of the time. Yes, sir.
And like in southern Wyoming, we had it growing right down along the North Platte River. It was in irrigated meadows. It was in ditches, or, right next to, like, it was in amongst like foxtail or creeping meadow foxtail and Timothy. And it was definitely in areas where both Tordon and 2,4-D are off label, right? So we are not supposed to be spraying that where it gets into the water. Good. And to your point about not adding fertility, right? We're basically pouring somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 an acre into the ground, and all we're getting is killing stuff, and not permanently at that. I think the $20 an acre cost I've had in my mind for a number of years is an annual cost. You're going to do it over and over and over again.
Right. And maybe back to that question on providing value to what we'll call it the other livestock enterprise that's on that land. In theory, that patch of leafy spurge, if it's bad enough, and those cattle are avoiding that grazing. When we go in there and, if we eventually knock that population of spurge or whatever it is back and break it in half or get it to a third of what it was, we should be opening up additional carrying capacity. You know, Once again, maybe a little tough to quantify sometimes, but it's in a positive trajectory.
Absolutely. Okay. How effective are you? Are you able to eliminate leafy spurge, or is this the kind of thing where it's a problem that you wind up managing for the long term?
So, I'll preface that with my earlier statement of, we're 2 years in for this for our personal experience with the stuff we've seen with our own eyeballs. But the research and whatnot out there and papers that I've read and stuff, it talks about essentially a 3-year time window to see a real significant control in these plants. And actually, on one particular ranch, we saw a significant difference after first year of application. Maybe we got lucky and conditions were different or some such thing as that, but we saw in a lot of places almost a half of what we'd seen the year before. And we were fortunate enough to have a control, and this was by design. We had a neighbor fence line right up against where we were doing this that was as thick as our spurge on the first year of application, and they came back the second year. Ours broke in half. His was just as strong. Essentially, same soil type, same exact conditions. So I think it was us. But to answer your better question there, I do think it's more like there is a degree of management in perpetuity. However, essentially, the number of goat days required in year one, it should be significantly less in year three. And so that's where we were, whatever valuation you're putting on that or cost you're putting on it, it should be decreasing into the future once you get a handle on this issue.
Yeah, and I think that's a trend we don't see with herbicide. All the cases I've looked at, it's like the cost is there, and it just goes on. It's to perpetuity, right? So,
Yeah.
and the worst part is if you get 1 year where something doesn't go right, you don't either get it sprayed at the right time, or it rains right after you do it, or whatever. Then it's like, man, then you just lose ground that year. So, all right, awesome. Well, that's really good. Now, what are some options for people that are facing these types of land management issues? They have a weedy species like leafy spurge. Having you come in and do it would be awesome. You work within about a 2-hour radius. You're in southeast Montana, right? So that's a limited part of our listenership. What can people do this on their own? Is this something that's doable for others?
Yeah, I would say we're probably more south central. At least that's where a lot of our work is. Not that just to be technically
Yeah, yeah, that's
whatever.
fair.
But as far as doing it on your own, it all comes back to goals, like everything else. And like our friend Wally says all the time, you need to know yourself. And that's a huge statement summed up real fast. But it depends, like say, it depends on the labor and management you have available, the land base you have available, and whatnot. And it kind of boils down to, assuming you're going to do it yourself. Okay, what do you do with the goats the rest of the year? Where do they go?
How long is the leafy spurge grazing season, for example?
Well, that's a little debatable, but depending on elevation and stuff, assuming your ranch doesn't change a whole lot across it for a specific land base, it's probably I would say a 60 to 90 day window, maybe a little less, some years maybe a little more. It changes for us because we can go from different elevations and different areas and we can broaden that. But on a specific land base, I would say you're probably in that 60 to 90-day window, basically. So yes, you're looking at the other 9 months of the year, so to speak. Of do you have do you have a job for them, and B, do you have a feed base for them, and C, do you have the labor that requires for them?
And do you herd your goats or do you fence them?
We primarily fence them. There is a little bit of herding time to time. We certainly have to move across some of these ranches to get to the other side and do things. But as far as like the actual grazing piece, a lot of it we're doing with fencing.
Okay, and that's like a poly net wire type portable.
Yeah, we bounce between a poly net and a two-strand poly fence, just depending on our applications and whatnot.
Yeah, good. Okay. All right. Well, let's keep going about, the sort of concerns about getting into this type of business. Again, lots of us don't know anything about small ruminants, so that's a whole different world in itself. What are the things that you look at that are kind of the challenges and the opportunities of it?
And we're talking about getting into the prescribed grazing business or getting into the goat business.
I would say just the goat or even the small ruminant business in general.
Right. I'll do it one more time. I'll take some of Wally's words because I think he's a wise man. But he's also said before, if you're going to have small ruminants, you have to have a shepherd. Whether you're it or somebody else is it, you have to have a shepherd. And, you know, somebody, understanding what that really means is a little more difficult. But it's a more intensive sort of job, and somebody almost has to be with those animals, on I shouldn't say daily, but a more regular basis than your average bovine operation, on most days. It just seems to be that way. So, yeah, that's maybe a really big piece of both knowledge and time and judgment with those things. It's hard to wrap all that up in one individual to have them look after that animal. Obviously, fencing, it can be an issue out here, in our arid, American West. The amount of feed you get off an acre is significantly less than what we do when we go east. So that fencing gets harder to pay for. And there's cheaper alternatives, of course, but how much you're going to have to update your fencing more than likely. And that's a big cost or a big endeavor for a lot of people. Obviously we deal with predators on these small ruminants, which isn't as big of an issue as our bovine friends. So sorting through that and how you manage that is more effort and more cost and more knowledge, and it can be solved. And, we really don't have issues with predators in our current operation and in our past operations, but we employ guard dogs, and we've taken a personal interest in managing them, and we enjoy it. So that's part of why it maybe works. Those are some of the other aspects to it. Marketing is another thing. Being able to get those animals sold where, at the price level you need to, can be challenging sometimes. The sheep and goat market is extremely seasonal. And so there's lots of highs and lots of lows. And being tuned into that is a whole nother knowledge base to have. And along with being able to get them to market, if you're smaller than scale and you don't have that sale barn that's within, decide what your radius is, if you don't have a sale barn an hour away to take a small load into, then, your efficiencies start to go down, because you're hauling them the longer ways, or you figure out how to get to scale and start operating in bigger loads.
Yep. Very good. How about up there? What do you see for health problems? Do you have troubles with feet and that sort of thing, or are you dry enough that it's not a problem?
Thus far, we haven't suffered a lot of health issues. And I attribute it not as much to our dry climate, which it undoubtedly helps us, I think, but it's management. And that goes back to the knowledge and risk on these small ruminants. We keep them moving enough, and we're really cautious about our feed quality and these sorts of things and our water quality. And I think because of all that management, we don't suffer from the health problems. I've been on operations where it doesn't look like that, and I'm not saying they're wrong in how they're managing. It's when it comes to health problems, there's more of it. There's more feet issues, there's more eye issues. Stuff gets thin all of a sudden, this, that, and the other, worms and the like. And it kind of does play into some of the prescribed grazing where we are moving them fast and, all these sorts of things. A high plane of nutrition fixes a lot of problems.
Agreed. We see that in cattle and all kinds of things, and the littler animals are, the more sensitive they are, right? So weaned calves more sensitive than stockers more sensitive than cows, and goats more sensitive than everything other than maybe rabbits.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, I'd like to wrap up. And one of the things I want to sort of finish with here is we have seen a lot of, cattle ranchers that try out the small ruminant approach. And we see a lot of them get out of it because it's too much work. A lot of them like the results. They see change in their pasture composition that they like. They see increases, in the forage available for cattle. They see improvements in their pastures. But ultimately, the work and all of the other things that you just mentioned, having a whole separate marketing program, having a whole separate management program, having separate labor, eventually drives them out of it. So I think what you're doing offers an awesome opportunity to sort of partner with people and have both of you bring your best skill sets to that, to one piece of ground where we have multiple things we need to get done. So, well, Ben, thanks for being here today. Where do we find you? Habig Livestock is your website, right?
Yeah. HabigLivestock.com is the website. We're on Instagram under Habig Livestock. We do have some older videos from a YouTube channel we have when we were in Texas under my name, Ben Habig. There's some good information there on just basic tactical stuff, fencing, guard dogs, these sorts of things. Those are kind of the three different places. And we are on Facebook as well, under Habig Livestock too.
And I forgot to mention, you guys sell dogs, right? That's a whole nother part of the small ruminant world that
Sure.
that starts to take over, right?
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. So we do have guard dogs from time to time for sale.
Awesome. All right. Well, Ben, thank you. I appreciate it. This is one of those places where we have a cost in our business that is, invasive species, undesirable species. I think over and over again, we see that a biological approach to those is often significantly more effective than a chemical one. Not that there isn't a place for chemicals, but man, most of these, we have this dream that we're going to spray weeds and then we're going to get rid of them. We have that dream kind of at the national level and at the individual property level. And over again, it just doesn't bear out. Once a new species shows up on our place, it's usually there for the duration. So,
Right.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, man. You have a wonderful day.
Hey, thank you for having me.
You bet. Bye. Thank you for tuning into the Ranchnomics podcast. We hope this episode helped you win today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with a friend.